James Carter's voice was flawless, too flawless. When his bank called to confirm a massive transfer, the words came from his own mouth, or so it seemed, but James hadn't made the call. Across the city, Sarah Martinez received a desperate plea for help from her father, only to discover the voice was a perfect digital copy designed to steal their savings. In a world where technology can clone a voice down to every inflection, how do you protect yourself when the person on the phone isn't really who they say they are? This is the chilling story of voice cloning scams that trick banks and tear families apart. In a quiet suburban town, people were beginning to notice something unsettling. Several local banks had started receiving complaints from customers who insisted they had never authorized the recent large transfers of money from their accounts. The amounts involved were significant, sometimes reaching tens of thousands of dollars, and in some cases, even hundreds of thousands. Yet, despite thorough checks, the banks found no signs of traditional hacking or stolen passwords. This mystery puzzled bank officials, who were left scrambling for answers while customers grew increasingly anxious and frustrated. At first, it seemed like a series of isolated incidents, but as the reports piled up, a troubling pattern emerged. The voice of the person authorizing the transactions was always perfectly clear, confident, and convincing. It was as if the bank employees were speaking directly to their real clients. The problem was, the customers insisted they never made those calls or requests. Some victims even confirmed that their voices had been recorded and used without their permission, but how exactly this was happening remained unclear. The police were called in to investigate, and soon they discovered that the criminals were using an advanced form of technology known as voice cloning. Unlike typical scams involving phishing emails or stolen passwords, this new method involved replicating a person's voice with startling accuracy. Criminals gathered audio clips from various sources, videos posted on social media, public speeches, phone messages, and even casual conversations overheard or recorded. These fragments were fed into sophisticated artificial intelligence software that pieced together a near-perfect digital copy of the victim's voice. This discovery sent shockwaves through the community and the financial world. The idea that someone could digitally wear your voice like a mask and deceive even trained bank employees was frightening. Suddenly, a voice, a feature once considered deeply personal and unique, was no longer a reliable proof of identity. Victims were stunned to learn that the criminals could imitate not just the sound of their voices, but also their manner of speaking, tone, and even emotional cues, making the deception nearly impossible to detect. What made this scam even more dangerous was the speed and confidence with which the fraudsters operated. Using the cloned voices, they called banks, posing as account holders in urgent situations. They pressured employees to authorize large transfers, reset security questions, or unlock accounts. Because the voice sounded authentic, many bank workers complied without question. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, victims were unaware their money was vanishing until it was too late. Beyond banks, families were also caught in the crossfire. The scammers didn't stop at financial institutions, they began targeting relatives. Some victims received phone calls that sounded exactly like a brother, sister, or parent in distress, asking for emergency loans or urgent money transfers. The emotional toll was devastating. Families were torn apart by suspicion and fear. Some relatives refused to answer calls, afraid it might be a scam. Others fell victim to the ruse and lost life savings in an instant. As the scope of the problem grew, law enforcement agencies struggled to keep up. This new breed of crime blurred the lines between technology and deception in a way no one had seen before. The voice cloning scam wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a psychological assault that preyed on trust, relationships, and the very sense of identity. The investigation was just beginning, and what lay ahead would reveal a chilling new chapter in the world of crime and technology. As the investigation into the mysterious voice cloning scams deepened, detectives uncovered more disturbing details about how the criminals operated. The first step in their scheme was surprisingly simple: gathering voice samples. Criminals scoured social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, searching for videos where their targets spoke clearly. Public speeches, interviews, podcast appearances, or even casual video blogs provided enough raw material. In some cases, scammers recorded snippets of phone calls or voicemail messages from unsuspecting victims. These small voice fragments, often only a few seconds long, were enough for the sophisticated AI programs to begin their work. The artificial intelligence software the scammers used was cutting edge. It took the collected voice samples and analyzed the tone, pitch, rhythm, and unique speech patterns of the person. The software then synthesized a digital voice clone that sounded almost indistinguishable from the real thing. The results were chillingly accurate, not just robotic copies, but voices that conveyed emotion, hesitation, and urgency, all crafted to fool human listeners. This technology, originally developed for entertainment and accessibility purposes, had been twisted into a powerful tool for deception. Armed with these voice clones, the scammers targeted banks and financial institutions with alarming precision. They called call centers and customer service lines, pretending to be account holders in distress. The cloned voices begged for urgent help, explaining a crisis, a lost password, or a suspected account hack. Bank employees, trained to listen carefully, but not always prepared for this new kind of trickery, often found themselves convinced. The scammers demanded immediate wire transfers, changes to account security, or the release of funds. In many cases, the criminals created a sense of emergency, so pressing that the banks waived their usual protocols, but the criminals didn't stop there. The investigation revealed they had expanded their targets to families of victims. Using the same cloned voices, scammers called relatives and friends, pretending to be loved ones in urgent need of money. Some victims reported hearing the voice of a parent, sibling, or child asking for help in what sounded like a genuine crisis. The emotional weight of these calls caused confusion and heartbreak. Families struggled to distinguish real calls from fake ones, with some tragically sending money to scammers before realizing they had been deceived. The psychological damage ran deep. The trust between family members was shaken, and many became suspicious of each other's intentions. Some victims stopped answering calls altogether, isolating themselves out of fear. Others were left financially devastated, losing life savings, retirement funds, or emergency money. The criminals exploited not only technology, but also human vulnerability, our instinct to help loved ones and respond to urgent situations. Investigators soon realized they were dealing with a highly organized criminal network. The scammers operated in a shadowy corner of the internet, where voice cloning tools, stolen audio clips, and instructions for targeting banks were bought and sold like commodities. Communication among members was encrypted, making it difficult for law enforcement to trace their activities. The group had layers of anonymity, using fake identities, proxy servers, and digital currencies to cover their tracks. Despite these challenges, law enforcement agencies began to coordinate with financial institutions and cybersecurity experts to develop new defenses. Awareness campaigns warned the public about the dangers of sharing too much personal information online, and banks started experimenting with multi-factor authentication systems that didn't rely solely on voice verification. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear this was just the beginning of a new kind of crime, one that would test the limits of technology, trust, and security in unexpected ways. The investigation took a dramatic turn when law enforcement managed to infiltrate the criminal network behind the voice cloning scams. After months of careful surveillance and undercover work, an agent was able to gain access to the group's online marketplace, where stolen voice samples, cloning software, and hacking tools were traded openly among members. This hidden digital marketplace was cloaked in layers of encryption and anonymity, but it was the heart of the operation, a place where criminals collaborated, shared intelligence, and planned their next moves. The agent's presence there gave investigators a rare glimpse into the scale and sophistication of the scam. The group was highly organized, operating almost like a business with different roles assigned to members. Some were tasked with collecting voice recordings, scouring the internet and social media for new targets. Others specialized in running the AI software that generated the cloned voices, refining them to sound as natural and convincing as possible. There were also callers, individuals who used the voice clones to contact banks and relatives, speaking with carefully crafted scripts designed to create urgency and avoid suspicion. Finally, there were money movers who coordinated the transfer of stolen funds through complex networks of accounts, cryptocurrencies, and offshore banks to cover their tracks. One particularly chilling discovery was the group's preparation for a major heist targeting a wealthy businessman known for his extensive assets and investments. The scammers had spent weeks gathering every piece of audio they could find: interviews, podcasts, even casual conversations caught on phone calls. The AI software had produced a flawless replica of his voice, complete with his unique cadence and inflections. Their plan was to call the businessman's bank, posing as him in an emergency situation, and request a massive transfer of funds to an account controlled by the criminals. The amount was so large that if successful, it would become one of the biggest voice cloning scams ever recorded. As police worked feverishly to intercept the transaction, tension in the investigation reached a fever pitch. Teams coordinated with bank security and cybersecurity experts to verify any unusual activity on the businessman's accounts. Surveillance was stepped up, and emergency protocols were put in place. Everyone was waiting for the phone call that could trigger the transfer. When the moment arrived, the scammers made the call with terrifying precision. The voice on the line was indistinguishable from the businessman's own, calm but urgent, convincing the bank employee to approve the transfer almost immediately. Just as the funds were about to move, law enforcement intervened. Using advanced tracking techniques and rapid response, they managed to freeze the transaction seconds before the money disappeared. The sting operation caught the scammers off guard, leading to multiple arrests and seizures of equipment, servers, and digital wallets. It was a major victory for investigators and a critical blow to the criminal network. However, the investigation did not end there. What came next would shake everyone involved to their core and change the narrative in ways no one had anticipated. The businessman targeted in the scam revealed a shocking secret: he had orchestrated the entire event himself as part of a controversial plan to expose weaknesses in banking security. This revelation raised questions about the boundaries between ethical hacking and criminal conduct. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, opening a new chapter in the complex story of voice cloning scams and the future of digital trust. The revelation that the businessman had orchestrated the entire voice cloning scam sent shockwaves through the investigation and the wider public. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of criminal deception now became a tangled web of ethics, motives, and unintended consequences. The businessman, a well-known figure in the financial world, admitted he had secretly hired hackers and cybersecurity experts to create a digital clone of his voice. His goal was to test the security systems of banks and financial institutions, exposing how vulnerable they were to emerging technologies. He believed that by staging a high-profile scam, he could force the industry to strengthen their defenses before real criminals caused irreversible damage. However, this well-intentioned plan had spiraled out of control. The voice clone he had commissioned was leaked or stolen by actual cybercriminals operating on the dark web. These criminals quickly recognized its value and began using it for their own fraudulent schemes, targeting not only banks, but also innocent families. The businessman's private experiment had inadvertently armed a dangerous new breed of scammers with a perfect tool for deception. Law enforcement agencies were stunned. What had started as a controlled security test had become a real, widespread threat. This twist complicated the investigation tremendously. Authorities now faced difficult questions about responsibility. Was the businessman a victim, a whistleblower, or a reckless provocateur? His actions had clearly exposed systemic flaws, but at what cost? Victims whose money had been stolen through scams using his voice clone demanded justice and compensation. Banks faced criticism for their slow response to the new threat, but also for failing to recognize the risks of such staged experiments in the first place. The case sparked intense debate within the financial and cybersecurity communities. Some experts argued that controlled hacking and simulations were necessary to stay ahead of criminals in an increasingly digital world. Others warned that such tests should never be conducted without strict oversight and safeguards to prevent leaks. The businessman's decision to keep the experiment secret only added to the controversy, as transparency might have prevented the misuse of the voice clone. Meanwhile, the criminals who had exploited the businessman's voice clone continued their operations, though now under increased pressure from global law enforcement. The arrests made during the sting operation disrupted much of the network, but experts warned that similar groups would emerge again, using evolving technology to outsmart authorities. The battle between cybercrime and cybersecurity was far from over. The businessman himself faced legal scrutiny. Investigators examined whether his experiment violated laws or regulations, especially regarding the unauthorized creation and distribution of biometric data. He cooperated with authorities, hoping his actions would ultimately lead to positive change, but he remained under investigation for potential negligence. For the victims caught in the middle, the story was bittersweet. Some received partial restitution, but the emotional scars of betrayal and loss lingered. Families struggled to rebuild trust, while banks accelerated efforts to upgrade their security systems. The scandal highlighted a crucial lesson. In the digital age, technological advances carry both promise and peril, and misuse, intentional or accidental, can have devastating ripple effects. As the dust settled, it became clear that voice cloning scams were more than just a passing trend. They represented a new frontier in crime and security, one that demanded vigilance, innovation, and ethical consideration. The businessman's experiment, while flawed, had exposed a future challenge that the world could no longer ignore. In the wake of the businessman's controversial experiment and the subsequent wave of voice cloning scams, banks and financial institutions found themselves forced to rethink their entire approach to security. Traditional methods of identity verification relying heavily on voice recognition were suddenly exposed as dangerously outdated. Industry leaders scrambled to develop and implement new technologies that could provide stronger, more reliable safeguards against voice fraud. One of the most significant changes was the widespread adoption of multi-factor authentication. Instead of relying solely on voice recognition during phone calls, banks began requiring multiple forms of identification simultaneously. This included text message codes, biometric scans like fingerprints or facial recognition, and secure app-based confirmations. These layered defenses made it far more difficult for scammers to impersonate customers, even with cloned voices. Alongside technological upgrades, regulatory bodies introduced stricter rules. New guidelines mandated that banks train their employees specifically to recognize potential voice cloning attempts and encourage the use of advanced voice analysis tools that could detect subtle signs of synthetic speech. Financial institutions were also required to report suspected voice fraud incidents more transparently, helping law enforcement track trends and respond more effectively. Public awareness campaigns played a crucial role in combating the scam. Victims and consumer advocacy groups worked together to educate people about the dangers of sharing personal information online and the risks associated with voice cloning technology. Many families, shaken by their experiences, learned to be more cautious about accepting urgent phone calls from anyone claiming to be a relative or friend in distress. Simple practices like verifying requests through multiple communication channels became a new norm. Meanwhile, the criminals responsible for the scams faced significant legal consequences. Many were arrested and charged with fraud, identity theft, and cybercrime offenses. Courts handed down harsh sentences, sending a clear message that the misuse of emerging technologies for criminal purposes would not be tolerated. However, experts warned that technology itself was neutral, neither good nor bad, and that new forms of fraud would inevitably appear as technology evolved. The businessman who had triggered the entire scandal remained a polarizing figure. Though he faced legal investigations, his efforts had undeniably pushed the industry toward necessary reforms. His experiment exposed vulnerabilities that might otherwise have gone unnoticed for years, potentially saving countless people from future harm. The controversy sparked a wider debate about the balance between innovation and responsibility in an age when technology could so easily be weaponized. As the world adjusted to this new reality, one fact became clear: the voice, once thought to be a unique personal identifier, could no longer be trusted on its own. In a digital age, identity verification had to become smarter, more nuanced, and more secure. Trust could no longer rest on familiar sounds or appearances alone. It required the combined strength of technology, regulation, and human awareness. The story of the voice cloning scams ended not with a final victory, but with a cautionary lesson. The rapid pace of technological change brought incredible opportunities, but also created new vulnerabilities that criminals were quick to exploit. In this evolving landscape, the fight to protect personal identity and financial security would be ongoing. Vigilance, innovation, and ethical responsibility became the cornerstones of defense against a future where anyone's voice could be copied and used against them without their knowledge.